We turn around, there's another Veterans Memorial that's under attack, and that's why we're so grateful for Liberty Institute.
Well, you can read about the history at pointofview.net. I think one of the key parts of it is that 10 mothers who had lost sons in the war, pulled together among other people to do this. And so, even the idea that you would then undo and destroy their work is a bit upsetting. And the other part of this is that, well, of course, the American Humanist Association, these groups, they're sort of out there sometimes, I think. One of their ideas was if you wanted to leave the cross up, you could just cut off the two arms. So it could be an obelisk instead of a cross, because a cross is so offensive. And listen, I'm so grateful for the work of Liberty Institute to go out and defend these crosses. We've had a success at the Supreme Court with the Mojave Desert Cross, thanks to Liberty Institute. And now we have this, and let's hope that it's not challenged. If it is, I'm sure you'll stay on the case, Mike. But, eventually we're just going to stop this nonsense because we're going to have enough victories, hopefully.
Mike, I'll speak to that issue for just a minute. Again, he's the Director of Military Affairs for Liberty Institute. But this, you would think, and I think almost any listener saying, didn't we solve this issue, with the Mojave case or even the one in San Diego and some of this? And it seems like every time we turn around, there's another cross case that you've had to defend.
Well, yeah, sometimes I feel like the proverbial, young boy that's just trying to plug my finger in the dam that's about to burst, because everywhere you turn, there seems to be another attack on a Veterans Memorial in this country. And really, you'd think at this time in our nation's history, especially with all the issues that veterans are facing coming to kind of the national consciousness, that we would, as a nation, be more interested in honoring the service and sacrifice of our veterans instead of attacking those who choose to honor them in their own way. But nevertheless, these attacks continue, literally from coast to coast. You mentioned the Mojave Desert Cross, Penna, so that one was all the way out in California. This one all the way over, 3,000 miles away on the East Coast in Maryland, and everywhere in between. Really, there's nowhere and no Veterans Memorial in this country that is safe from attack. In fact, just recently there was one, pretty much smack dab in the middle of the country in Knoxville, Iowa. So, and one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that as Liberty Institute continues to defend these and to prevail and win these victories in court, there's this notion in the law called precedence, and precedence is extremely important for lawyers and for people who pay attention to the law. Because really what that does is that begins to establish the foundation and the firm foothold for others to kind of follow in place. And so when you have a Veterans Memorial in the Mojave Desert in California that is upheld as constitutional, and then you have one in Maryland that's upheld as constitutional, eventually, slowly over time, people begin to get the message that, okay, these Veterans Memorials are kind of off limits for attack, and that's really what we're hoping happens in the long run.
I've heard Kelly talk about the importance of the crosses, just sort of as that it trickles down to other issues of religious liberty, because people can say, if there's any question about government establishment of religion or practicing a religion in a public space or whatever, those crosses are still up. If the crosses were taken down, then we would, we'd begin to, I think, see a stripping of the landscape that would be so sad. And so, we destroy our First Amendment, and we're already having to defend that in so many different areas.
Let's take a break. When we come back, though, we'll get into that in a little more detail, and that is this new phrase, prayer shaming. And today, Peggy Noonan, the First Amendment needs your prayers, and you were just talking about that as well, that in the midst of this, and of course we saw that just the other day with the New York Daily News, front page, it says, God's not helping. And they showed all the individuals that had been tweeting out that our thoughts and prayers go out to those individuals that were killed or the families that remained after the killing in San Bernardino. And so this is another aspect of religious liberty. It may not be as easy to identify as a cross in Bladensburg, Maryland, but it's certainly an illustration, again, about just kind of the anti-Christian hostility we see, don't you think?
It was unbelievable. Even at the time when people were hiding from perhaps more killing that might have been going on and asking their family members to pray via cell phone and text, these reporters were coming, or these folks, journalists, quote unquote, were coming out and blasting politicians for doing just that.
Well, we're
going
to come out and address that issue as well, and love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. And, of course, we're going to revisit what we've learned a little bit more from San Bernardino. One very interesting fact of the shooter's wife that, as some people have said, leaves no doubt about the motive for the killing. And we'll get into that and take your comments. A little bit later, we'll talk about women in combat. We've got a lot to cover. We'll do that right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although America is among the most religious of the world's developing nations, it turns out that Americans in general don't know very much about the world's religions. Those are some of the conclusions of a survey done by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life. An earlier study found that nearly 6 in 10 U.S. adults said that religion is very important in their lives, but the most recent Pew survey found that they could only answer about half of the 32 questions about religion. When the study was published, some press reports made it seem like atheists and agnostics knew more about religion than Protestants and Catholics. Here are the facts. Atheists and agnostics answered on average about 20 questions correctly. Evangelicals answered 17, and the average number of questions answered by all the groups was 16. The conclusion we should reach is that no one did well on the test. If this was a test on religion in a university, everyone would flunk. On questions about Christianity, evangelical Protestants showed the highest levels of knowledge. Jews, atheists, and agnostics stood out for their knowledge of other world religions, but again, making these distinctions misses the point. No group did very well in their understanding of religion. A majority of Protestants could not identify Martin Luther as the person whose writings and actions inspired the Protestant Reformation. Catholics did not understand the Roman Catholic Church's teaching on communion, and fewer than half of Americans know that the Dalai Lama is Buddhist. So what did most Americans know? Nearly 9 out of 10 knew that public school teachers cannot lead class in prayer. More than 8 in 10 knew that Mother Teresa was Catholic. More than 7 in 10 knew that Moses led the Exodus from Egypt. The Pew surveys demonstrate an appalling lack of religious knowledge. Americans are not just biblically illiterate, they are religiously illiterate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter with me, Weekend Edition, and, of course, Michael Berry with Liberty Institute and the Director of Military Affairs and Senior Counsel there. We're going to focus on a lot of issues, but before we get into some of the big ones, we mentioned just in passing this idea of prayer shaming. Peggy Noonan addressed it today in her column in the Wall Street Journal, and others have talked about it. There does seem to be just a lot of hostility towards Christian ideas, and in particular, the sense that, well, you've got to stop just telling us that your thoughts and prayers go about it. You should think about actually implementing gun control, and if you don't, pray for forgiveness because you're not doing the right thing. That's at least one of the clips that came out, and I think it's illustrative of what we are almost not allowed to say anymore in public.
It's part of this, I think, this whole atmosphere of being very careful what you say. I mean, we can talk a little bit later about the university campus, which, there's just this fear of not being PC. But in this case, it was during the attacks when they were still looking for the perpetrators and maybe a third person, and people didn't know what was happening. And certain presidential candidates even were praying, and at that time on the spot. I think it's wonderful. But no. If you're not for gun control, prayer isn't going to work, and you shouldn't be praying. You shouldn't be publicly praying or reported as praying, because you are on the wrong side of this issue. God's not going to help you. God didn't fix it.
Wow. We are privileged to be joined now by Cathie Adams. And earlier this week, we spent some time talking about the Climate Change Conference in Paris. And we also talked about some of the concerns that we have. And so she's joining us now using an international phone and is, I believe, traveling. But Cathie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear your voices. I feel like I'm back at home, and it just feels so good after hearing people around me are speaking all this foreign language called French. So thanks so much for this great opportunity.
Cathie, we know it's a labor of love for you to go to these conferences and watch what the United States is doing at the United Nations. And in sort of reading about this climate conference, and I think what it really is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of a reiteration of Kyoto that happened back in 1997, attempting to get nations to agree to real emissions cuts, major cuts that would harm economies. But there's a term that I've seen called intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs. Is that what this conference is about?
$17.64 remaining. Please enter the telephone number you wish to dial now. To enable calls...
Guess we'll have to turn it off there.
That must be the international operator.
Yeah, it must be. So we'll see if we can get her back. But one of the concerns we had about the climate conference is that we are spending a lot of money, but we're not getting much bang for the buck. As a matter of fact, we could be on the order of trillions of dollars over 85 years. Some people figured it could be as much as $85 trillion so that you could actually increase... or maybe prevent an increase of more than 1 degree Fahrenheit in the mean temperature in the world. Well, $85 trillion over 85 years, and all you can do is maybe prevent an increase of 1 degree Fahrenheit. That seems to me to be the best definition of a lot of buck for very little bang.
Yeah, we sort of make fun of this climate change, quote unquote, religion and what they try to do at the UN and how arrogant they are. But this causes not only the cost to the taxpayer, but it costs because of the changes that we have to make in our environmental policy. And the Appalachian areas of this country have absolutely been devastated by the requirements on the coal industry and really the closure of many coal-powered facilities. And so, that's just one real harm, economic harm that it's caused. And I think we'll find, too, as we're forced to rely on other sources of energy besides fossil fuels, we're going to see an unreliability also in the system, and we're going to experience blackouts, and we're kind of spoiled with regard to the energy we're able to use, and that will not remain if these types of requirements actually take effect and escalate.
Well, again, we'll try to connect up with Cathie Adams. She had her cell phone actually stolen, so she was using a different phone, and you heard what happened there. But we can get into San Bernardino because we know a little bit more. Of course, 2 suspects were killed by the police, and they're Saeed Farouk as well as Tashfeen Malik. And he actually had traveled to Saudi Arabia, returned with her and having a visa as a fiancé. Now, again, Penna, you got to roll your eyes a little bit. He and his wife left their 6-month-old baby daughter with their mother in Redlands, California, before they then opened fire on those individuals, 14 dead, 21 wounded, and also then later when they were attacked by the police, and police were trying to bring them out, they threw pipe bombs. Most of those did not explode, but nevertheless, we go into now the garage. We find out that they had a lot more plan than just shooting a few people at this inland facility.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because there was this assumption by the administration and the media at the beginning that this was another crazy white person, religious fanatic that perpetrated this. It turns out that this could be terrorism, very well could be. All the signs are there. And, but the fact that they left their baby kind of throws you off a little bit.
Yeah, what was that
Although
about?
Many, really radical Muslims are just so committed to the cause that it overshadows everything.
Yeah. And maybe they thought they would just shoot everybody up and get away from it.
Well, they did try to get away.
Yeah, and so maybe they just thought, well, just a day in the life of. I don't know. Michael, any comments? You've been watching this all week. I'd love to get your comments as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing that really struck me about this tragedy was some of the irresponsibility I saw coming out of the media and some of the reporting, just in terms of jumping into conclusions before we had all the facts. I mean, there's still obviously a lot of unknown variables. So that's always concerning when people in the media appear to have a certain narrative or a certain agenda that they want to push, and they are in a rush to get that out there. I mean, for example, I think, I don't remember which media outlet it was, but they began as the incident was occurring, begin talking about the proximity to a Planned Parenthood clinic and how it appear, the Planned Parenthood clinic appears to be safe. They don't appear to be targeting it. Immediately trying to draw, parallels between what the other tragedy that recently happened in Colorado Springs. And so, clearly people in the media have an agenda, and it's to push another example would be the fact that, our own government refuses to refer to this as an act of terror or an act of radical extremism, and they consider it workplace or gun violence, which are obviously the term gun violence is a highly politicized term. And it reminds me of one of Rahm Emanuel's favorite sayings, which is never let a crisis go to waste. And that is to say that if you have an opportunity to earn some political capital out of a tragedy, then you should do so. And that seems to be what's happening here, which is really taking advantage and exploiting what is a national tragedy.
One thing we seem to now know about this woman, Tashfeen Malik, is that she may be the reason for some of the radicalization. And it turns out that she had posted her pledge to an ISIS leader and a self-proclaimed Caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the head of course, ISIS, and around about the time of the attack. And so you have to wonder about the vetting procedure that we have. She was actually brought into this country as part of vetting for a K-1 visa. And of course, she was here. He, of course, is an American citizen. This is a real concern as well, Penna, because we're talking about individuals, in his case, was born here, others who came here legally, who then perpetrated this attack.
That struck me, Kerby. His parents were from Pakistan. They came here. His father seemed to be just sort of a moderate and normal citizen. He would wear the white kind of garb, but, didn't seem to have any radical ideas. And the son, too, for most of his life seemed that way. And he was pretty devout, memorizing the Quran, going to the mosque. And then he met this woman online and ended up going to Saudi Arabia and marrying her. And this is when he started to change and grew a beard and got more radical. So it strikes me that, sometimes the children, you can't assume that because you've got peace-loving Muslims living in the country, that their children who were born here will not be radicalized. That is another concern to add to all the other concerns about people coming in here.
Yes, we've seen that before. I've noticed even apart from the radicalization, sometimes the mother of a Muslim coming here might not wear a hijab, but their daughters will. They want to come back and find their connection. And of course, this case, the radicalization may have happened to Saeed Farouk because of Tashfeen Malik. But nevertheless, we need to take a break, and when we come back, I'd love to get your comments, because what does this say about our vetting process? What does it say about an issue even beyond that? Lots of debate right now about whether to not bring Syrian refugees in, and many of them are going to come here despite the fact that some governors are fighting against it. But in some of these cases, we're talking about homegrown individuals, and up until now, maybe you could call it workplace violence, but when she pledges her commitment to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, I think we can agree with Michael. It's a terrorist act. We'll be right back.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. In studio with me today, Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, a Director of Military Affairs and Senior Counselor for Liberty Institute. And we certainly welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. What can we do to prevent these mass shootings in the future? Certainly, what should we be thinking about in terms of our policies, bringing individuals here and even the radicalization of those who are here legally? Certainly a lot of issues on the table. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Michael, you saw something just come down over the wire. So tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, I guess now we can call it official. I saw something indicating that the FBI had just a few moments ago declared that they are characterizing what happened in San Bernardino as an act of terrorism, and not merely, workplace violence or gun-related violence or something like that. So it is a mass shooting. We can characterize it as a mass shooting, but it's a specific type of mass shooting, which we would call terrorism. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. And I'm actually pleasantly surprised that our government would be willing to call it that. Call it what it is.
And while we're talking about mass shooting, just before we get back to this, you're going to be hearing a lot of these numbers thrown around. And let's be honest, any mass shooting is certainly something to be against, and certainly something to be horrified by. And certainly there are lots of concerns that we have. But there is a mass shooting tracker website out there, and everybody's been using this number. That is, this is the 355th mass shooting this year. Now, you start thinking that through even without even trying to apply numbers, and you're going, well, that's like one a day. And you're going, I don't think so. And it turns out that if you do any kind of research, you recognize that what they do is they've actually even added to this people that were shot at by a pellet gun.
That's a mass shooting?
Yeah, as long as you have someone more than one, that could be a mass shooting. It also counts in some cases a domestic situation where somebody kills the wife and the in-laws. I mean, all that's counted in there. And frankly, even if you go to the Congressional Research Service, which defines mass shooting as 3 or more killings in a single incident, they come up with 317 from 1999 to 2013. In other words, the point is, these numbers are horribly inflated. And so when you hear the president say this is the 355th mass shooting this year, just using a sense of common sense, say, wait a minute. I mean, even if you count every gun-related shooting, every possible way in which someone could count that as a mass shooting, you still couldn't come up with that number. So just be real careful and use some discernment when you hear people talking about some of those issues.
It sort of dilutes the problem. And Peggy Noonan mentioned this in her column for this weekend, that, we look at these shootings now and we almost yawn. I mean, we do get disturbed about it, but it becomes so commonplace. But, and then you've got people like Fareed Zakaria on CNN saying that America's worse than with regard to this, America's worse than every country but Yemen. And that's really? Ridiculous. Yeah, that's a ridiculous comment to be making. So there's a lot of exaggeration going on with regard to this. And I think in a sense it then takes the focus off this particular incident. And this focus here, I mean, it has been declared terrorism, but it's also Islamic-inspired terrorism, and that narrative has already begun to be out there, and it seems to be unmistakable that is the case, that this has been inspired by Islamic extremism.
And the fact that it has been or was inspired by Islamic extremism is also problematic, because one of the other side stories that's come out of this in the media is that there were coworkers or people who knew this couple who committed this atrocity, who said that they thought that something wasn't right, or that they suspected that there may be, that these two might not be up to any good, but that they feared reporting anything out because they did not want to engage in what they thought would be racial profiling.
Yes.
And so I recall when I lived and worked in Washington, D.C., seeing Homeland Security signs everywhere saying, if you see something, say something, in the aftermath of 9/11, the 9/11 terror attacks. And you don't see those signs anymore. And my concern is that are we losing that sense of saying, collective security, and if you see something, say something, where now it's, well, if you see something, only say something if you think the perpetrator is a white male, who's more likely a Christian conservative, because if they appear to have olive or dark skin, appear to have a foreign accent, or are have facial hair or wearing a head covering, you don't want to be known as a racial profiler, so don't say anything. And just to me, I think, where is our common sense? Might this have been prevented if somebody had simply said, placed an anonymous call and said, these people seem to be buying a lot of ammunition and firearms recently.
Bringing lots of boxes and all that kind of stuff. I'll give you a couple of quotes here. One of the neighbors said, "I was in awe that it was happening 4 doors down from my property." And then one man who has been interviewed quite a bit had been working in the area, and he noticed about a half a dozen Middle Eastern men in that area coming in with boxes, sometimes late at night and all that. And he said, "We sat around lunch thinking, what were they doing in the neighborhood? We'd see them leave, and then they'd be raiding the apartment." But again, he admitted, "I just did not want to have somebody say that I was racially profiling people." And you can understand, you'd be fearful that somebody might come back and shoot you. But even apart from that, even if you report that, you're afraid you might get sued. Remember the clock boy?
Yeah.
I mean, just down the road from us here was this young man who goes into a school, and in that Irving school, he opens this up, and the teacher says, "Well, put that away," and he's kind of goofing around a little bit with it, and the students are getting a little bit agitated. He takes it into an English class, and it goes off. It rings, and at that point, they bring in the various people to look at it, including the police. They take him away. Now, his father is suing them. $10 million he wants from the city of Irving, $5 million from the school district. Otherwise, we're going to bring a lawsuit. And I think a lot of people at this point, Michael, start saying, see something, maybe not say something, right?
Well, and then if that's really the calculus that people are engaging in now, where it's somebody sued a school district in a city for combined $15 million, I better not say anything. Well, now you're trying to put a dollar value on human life. Yeah. And so at what point do we say enough is enough? That the loss of even one life is worth simply alerting the authorities to something that just doesn't seem right to me or seems out of the ordinary. And if it turns out to be innocent, then great, it's innocent. But what if it could have prevented the Boston Marathon bombings? What if it could have prevented what happened in the community college in Oregon or in San Bernardino? So just from, and maybe it's the old, military guy in me, but, if I can just protect one person through my actions, and even if I turn out to be wrong, I'm willing to do it.
That's good. Let's take some phone calls. Matter of fact, that's one of the calls here in North Carolina. Joby wants to address that issue, so you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Hi, Kerby. Not too long after 9/11, I actually did make a phone call while I was out in California, or a military guy myself. I feel the same way. The problem is, who do you call? Because right now the FBI, and I'm just going to use this term, and I know it's not politically correct, but they're stuck up. They think that of course they are above the law, because you can't even lie to an FBI agent and you'll go to prison. But if you even attempt to call an FBI agent, they probably won't follow up on your lead. There's nothing saying that they need to even follow up, call, or do anything. The local sheriff's department, for people to know, that's the person to call, because local sheriffs are more inundated with the community, what's going on. 90% of the people would normally call the FBI, but your local sheriff's department, not even your police department, they're not even scheduled a way to do this for investigation, but your local sheriff, that would fall under their jurisdiction.
Good point.
Sounds like a good advice.
Yeah, and again, I think that's what we need to do. See something, say something. That's a trademark, actually. I noticed the other day they had a little trademark sign on it, so it's something that's still around, but I agree with you, Michael. We're not seeing very many of those signs.
Well, see something, say something, and ask for help. But there's one other piece of this we alluded to at the beginning, but certainly when this happened, there were calls for gun control, as there always are, more gun control laws, more restrictions on people having guns. And so, that's the other argument is, are things less safe when you actually strip people of their rights to carry some kind of protection? In places like California, the strict registration laws, and you aren't more safe. And yet this is, every time one of these happens, there's an excuse for these outright accusations of against people who want to protect those Second Amendment rights.
One of the articles I posted yesterday by John Lott, Mass Shootings and Gun Control, in which he points out that most of these have happened in places that have extensive background checks. Colorado, California, for example, Oregon, to mention just a few. Not to mention France. Both of you have gone to France before and recognize that you want to see draconian gun control laws. That's where they exist there.
Well, what about what Barbara Boxer said about California, how well they're working?
Yeah, again, irresponsibility. And when Senator Boxer made the statement that gun control clearly works, just look at the great example California has set.
I think you got the point.
Really?
Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is the tale of two university presidents. First, at Yale, Peter Salovey responded to student mob demonstrations with efforts to make students feel more valued rather than disrespected and in pain. These students either have parents rich enough to pay the school's $65,000 per year tuition or are bright enough to benefit from the university's massive endowment, but they're offended, stating Yale is not an inclusive space for people of color and other minorities. This fall, a committee of students raised the possibility that someone might wear an insensitive Halloween costume, like a feathered headdress or a turban, anything that might negatively impact someone's sense of being in a safe space at the university. One professor, Erica Christakis, thinking this a bit too PC, wrote a letter to students in which she wondered, have we lost faith in young people's capacity, in your capacity to exercise self-censure through social norming, and also in your capacity to ignore or reject things that trouble you? 700 came out to protest. President Salovey says he hears students' cries for help, saying some students find life on our campus profoundly difficult. He promised relief for their great distress. A generation of coddling by university officials has helped create these perishable snowflakes, which exist in great numbers at the nation's progressive universities. There are a few floating around even at Christian colleges. Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, reports a student coming forward after a university chapel service, complaining he felt victimized by the sermon because it was on 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. This student said the sermon made him feel bad for not showing love, and therefore the speaker was wrong for causing him and his peers such discomfort. Dr. Piper, unlike the presidents at Yale, Mizzou, and elsewhere, is definitely not apologizing. In an open message to the offended student on the university's blog, he wrote, "That feeling of discomfort you have after listening to a sermon is called a conscience." Dr. Piper explained that the goal in many sermons is to elicit confession of sin, not to coddle students in their selfishness. He stated that for students who want to be enabled rather than confronted, there are many universities across the land where that can happen, but Oklahoma Wesleyan isn't one of them. He offered some strong advice, including these words: "We don't believe that you have been victimized every time you feel guilty, and we don't issue trigger warnings before altar calls." He ended the post with a statement to students of Oklahoma Wesleyan that's obvious, but too often downplayed in the oversensitive environment at universities everywhere. He wrote, "This is a place where you will quickly learn that you need to grow up. This is not daycare. This is a university." It would be nice if more university presidents would treat students with such love. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Michael Berry with us today. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head up to Alaska, KJNP and Dale. What's your question for us today?
Yes, sir. Well, before I ask my question, I appreciate that commentary that just played, Penna Dexter talking about that university president and the coddling of the student. Anyway, the question is...
Thank you.
You betcha. The question is, in the beginning, when this California massacre first started, there was a commentary on they were chasing the third person, and he was stripping his camouflage clothing off as he ran. And then the next comment was they thought they had him cornered. I have not heard anything since, and they're only talking about the two, completely ignoring the third. So was he FBI plant or what? I have absolutely no faith in media nor government now.
Sure.
It's a very good question.
You know, they have given him, they have had a name for him because they were trying to find him. So I don't think you're talking about an FBI plant, but I think it's a good example, Penna, that something we've talked about before. The news media every day, it looks at what's happening that day and it moves on. And sometimes we try to circle back and say, this is what we found out about something we talked about 2 weeks ago. And that, I think, is apart from just the media bias and the liberal bias of the media, it's also just this focus where it sometimes never finishes the story. And that's a story that the last I heard, they were looking for an individual and he was given a name so that they could find that individual, question that individual, and find out more. Michael, anything else you found?
No, I actually think that was a very good question from the caller, because that was one of the things I wondered too, and I thought maybe I was getting my stories confused between what happened in San Bernardino and somewhere else, because I do recall as the incident was unfolding, hearing that there was a third person, a third shooter that was on the loose, and then the media just kind of went silent on it, and I thought, well, maybe I was was seeing things or hearing things, and old age is catching up to me or something along those lines. So I'm perplexed as to why we haven't really heard anything about it.
Yeah, I'm perplexed too. And I read a news piece today. I can't find it in my stack here, but it's somewhere. And that they've narrowed it down to saying now perpetrators was the act was done by two people. That third person, they just aren't sure who that was, whether that was actually someone that was involved in the act or someone who was just curious or someone just running alongside to see whatever, but that person just seems to have fallen into oblivion. So I still have big questions in my mind too.
Well, Michael, let's speculate for just a minute. These two individuals didn't build all those pipe bombs and do all those IEDs. They had help, and there were as many as a half a dozen Middle Eastern men that were identified by one of the neighbors and one of the men in the neighborhood. So maybe they want to find out if this is part of a terror cell or something of that nature.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where responsible journalism becomes extremely important in making sure we don't jump to conclusions before we know the facts. And so I think that while it is fair to maybe speculate and offer theories, I think we can't be too quick to immediately assume that, well, there must be a cell there, a terror cell in San Bernardino. But another thing that's just thinking about this that really piques my curiosity is I have seen that there have been quite a few photos of the husband of the two, but none of Tashfeen Malik, the wife. And why there have been no photos released of her. And I don't think it's because she was a minor or anything like that. So that's something that really causes me to, and the only thing I can think of I'm trying not to be too politically correct here, but the only thing I can think of is that it may be because either there are no photos of her because of her Muslim faith, or that the only photos that exist are of her in full covering, and therefore the media does not want to perpetrate that narrative.
Could be.
Yeah.
I did read that she was unrecognizable, that there's really no one that could recognize her because she always was covered, including her face, so that we could not tell who she was. And all of this is very interesting.
Yes. You've asked a good question, Dale. When we find out more, we'll let you know. But it seems like the press is so far starting to move on, especially when it turned out that it wasn't an angry white man.
Yeah, hopefully the FBI isn't.
Yes, so I'm sure they are. There may be some reasons for that. Dale mentioned just a minute about your commentary, and of course, at this time of the program, we always play your commentary, the two university presidents, and I would encourage people to go to the website pointofview.net, because you contrast the reaction from the president at Yale University to the comments made by one of the professors there that was not seen as politically correct. And what a contrast to Dr. Everett Piper, who's been on this program once or twice with us before, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. And I just love his line. This is not a daycare. This is a university. If you're looking for a safe space, you're looking in the wrong spot, because we're going to have a rigorous interchange of ideas. And we don't believe that you have been victimized every time you feel guilty. And we don't issue trigger warnings before, for example, a chaplain's message on guilt and on love. So I thought it was very well done. And if people would like to read it, it's on our website, pointofview.net.
Yeah, Dr. Piper made some, I think his points were good. And in a sense, he's speaking to the whole country. I saw that he was also interviewed at Heritage Foundation, and really speaks to the absurdity of students dictating what professors get to say, and just, the whole policy, what can be said and what can't. These little sort of precious, delicate flowers that exist on the campuses across the country being protected by their presidents. And so, it was good for him to bring that up and to kind of talk some common sense into his Christian college.
Very good. Let's take another phone call. We'll head up to Missouri. KTTK. Don, I think you want to talk about a religious liberty case. And since we have Michael Berry from Liberty Institute in there, go for it.
We've been hearing on the regional news about Berryville, Arkansas, and I believe it was the Eastern District, Sixth Court Federal Appeals judge had just ruled that they couldn't have a nativity scene down there, and all the businesses started putting them up on their own property, because it couldn't be on the county steps. I was talking to my wife about this, and we got to thinking, these federal judges, don't they get paid for Christmas time and Easter, So why don't we start standing up and demanding they recuse themselves from any of these cases when they rule against us based on the fact that they're being paid for a religious holiday?
Yeah, I think the better idea is to make sure we get the right judges into those particular positions. And I know, Michael, your job would be a lot better if we could elect the right individuals, because most judges are appointed and others are directly elected. And I think as we come to an election season, it's about time we pay attention to who we're going to put into office.
Yeah, many lawyers in my line of work, and actually, to your point, Kerby, if we did have more of the quote unquote right kind of judges, I might not have a job. So, but nevertheless,
I'm sure you'd find something to do.
I'm sure I would find something to do. My wife would make me, I think, but. That's one of the things that I think really conservative Christians, or just conservatives, or just Christians in general, really need to be paying attention to as we approach election season, and really encourage you, my public service announcement quickly here is to register to vote and vote. I don't think people realize how important the presidential election is when it comes to appointing judges, because those judges are going to be on the bench for decades beyond a president's term. And those judges are the ones that are going to be issuing these types of rulings that the caller just talked about. So it's really going to be having a huge ripple effect across our country when it comes to our presidential elections.
Be right back.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, if you're just joining us, we have in studio with us today Penna, Dexter, and Michael Berry, who is the Director of Military Affairs for Liberty Institute, also Senior Counsel. We have talked about a number of things, everything from some pro-life kind of victories that we talked about earlier in the week to religious liberty victories we've talked about today. We've, of course, talked about San Bernardino and what has happened there, the shooting, the mass shooting, as well as one other issue we might get back to for just a minute before we get into some more phone calls, Penna. That is this idea of prayer shaming. It's a phrase that has gotten some currency, and it seems to be something that we as Christians are going to have to pay attention to.
I never heard the term until this week.
Yes.
But, people were praying during what was going on in San Bernardino, and they were searching for the people, and then they finally had a shootout, and the perpetrators were killed. At least two of them were. And, we had people praying. We had people in the area asking for prayer, and then even very publicly, certain presidential candidates like Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, they were praying, and they publicly said that, tweeted it, and other things. Well, then the New York Daily News published a cover very quickly, basically shaming these politicians for praying. And notably, they were all people who are pro-guns, gun rights, pro-Second Amendment people. And so, that was part of this whole idea of prayer shaming. And, I think it's shameful that they would do that, first of all. And I think, in a sense, we have this new atmosphere now where Christians are fair game and Muslims aren't, in a sense. And FRC came out and said it's a new era of openly demonizing people of deep and sincere faith. People that pray are usually people of deep and sincere faith, especially if they're going to say publicly that they're praying. And so, this is coming from people on the left. And I think there is this, the people on the left, the real leftist leaders, want religious people out of the way because they are in the way of their agenda of control. And so, they want now their big pushes to take away our guns and to get more gun control laws because of these mass shootings. And so they're saying that God can't fix it. And they're implying that big government that restricts your constitutional right to arm yourself and protect yourself can fix it. And so there's sort of a battle between, the religious sensibility of Americans and secularism that's playing out, basically this week, in all of these sort of media wars.
We posted a number of articles. One of those I'd like some of you to read, if you could, maybe even post it on your Facebook page, by David French, which we just simply called No Thoughts and Prayers. The longer article title is The Left's Assault on Thoughts and Prayers, Revealing Its Anti-Christian Bigotry and Rank Political Posturing. We didn't want to put all that there, but
it's a whole article in itself.
Just an incredible amount of material that you might want to pay attention to. And of course, also today, Peggy Noonan talked about the fact that this has won a name now called prayer shaming. So this is maybe the first time you're hearing about it here on Point of View. I'm afraid we're going to be hearing about it in the future. Michael, any comments?
Yeah, I think one of the things we can do is kind of zoom out a little bit and really try to connect the dots across multiple segments of society and see what's happening. So you have this notion of prayer shaming in response to what happened in San Bernardino, but then also consider the Coach Kennedy case that, of course, Liberty Institute represents Coach Joe Kennedy, who was suspended from his job as a football coach. Why? because he publicly engaged in religious expression by bowing his knee and taking a knee and bowing his head after football games. And I just saw in the Huffington Post the other day another article about football players at the U.S. Air Force Academy who did just as many football players do across this country and what Joe Kennedy did, which is to take a knee and bow their head before the football game. And they're being called out by the Huffington Post for publicly praying. And the whole thing being that they go to a public institution, that they're military cadets, they shouldn't be doing this, et cetera, et cetera. And so, if we zoom out a little bit and begin to connect the dots, you're beginning to, I think, see really what's part of a much larger concerted effort to really eradicate religious expression from every corner of the public, from every public space in America, to say, we don't want a veterans memorial if it happens to be in the shape of a cross. We don't want a public school football coach to pray if he happens to be a Christian. We don't want football players to pray if they go to a public school. And we don't want politicians or people running for president to say that they're praying if there's been a tragedy. And, really, we were talking about this during one of the breaks, but what it really reminds me of a lot is kind of it has a flavor of the French Revolution to it.
Yes.
Which is very...
It's interesting you said that, yes.
Which is very disconcerting and really very sad.
Yeah. And just to kind of the whole secularization of society, but you can go all the way back to the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century and see some of that. That fits very well with one of the phone calls here. So let me go to Tim real quickly. I think you wanted to speak to these issues, and so thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Hi. First off, Ms. Dexter, I loved your commentary a few minutes ago. And then two, I'm thinking this kind of reminds me of in the book of Acts when the church was really persecuted. I think it's time for Christians. You can't just sit on the sidelines anymore. We need to, put up or shut up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, I think that's going to be the case, and as a matter of fact, if we don't get involved, we're going to lose some of our rights if we don't speak them out. Let me use a different one of your cases. The Kuntz cheerleaders, for example, would have been real easy for these cheerleaders to just say, well, okay, we won't put up our signs. But they said, no, we have a right to do this. Joe Kennedy, Coach Kennedy could have said, okay, I'll just obey that. No, that's fine. I mean, you think of a lot of the cases that you guys have been dealing with. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Christians said, wait a minute, there is religious liberty, and I'm going to lose my religious liberty if I don't exercise my religious faith and don't actually exercise it in the public arena.
Yes, and to Tim's point about us needing to get off the sidelines, and to your point, Kerby, about Liberty Institute's clients, as I've gotten to know a lot of these clients personally, through the course of representing them in these cases and whatnot, one of the things that becomes very clear to them is, and often really what causes them to really dig in and steals their resolve, is when they realize it's not just about their rights anymore. Yes. That their ability, their courage to take a stand and to say, to draw the line in the sand and say, I won't go past this line right here. I won't let the government take my rights away beyond this. It's when they begin to realize it's not just about me anymore, that there are thousands, if not millions, of other people in this country who will likely have their rights taken away because I'll be used as that example. That the other side, the enemies of religious freedom, will look at my case and say, well, look, he wasn't allowed to do it. We won that case. We tore that Veterans Memorial down. So why can't we tear this Veterans Memorial down? And they'll never say it publicly, but the people who are trying to tear down these Veterans Memorial, for them, the mother lode would be Arlington Cemetery. That would be the gold mine if they could have those rows of white crosses unearthed and removed and destroyed. And they'll never say that publicly, but I guarantee you that's ultimately what they want to happen.
Wow. To show you the power of that, yesterday I'm at Cabela's. We're having a conversation. They talk about the Atlanta fire chief that lost his job. So, it's making its way into the popular culture. A lot of people are talking about it. And we, again, just salute what Liberty Institute is doing. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Although America is among the most religious of the world's developing nations, it turns out that Americans in general don't know very much about the world's religions. Those are some of the conclusions of a survey done by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life. An earlier study found that nearly 6 in 10 U.S. adults said that religion is very important in their lives, but the most recent Pew survey found that they could only answer about half of the 32 questions about religion. When the study was published, some press reports made it seem like atheists and agnostics knew more about religion than Protestants and Catholics. Here are the facts. Atheists and agnostics answered on average about 20 questions correctly. Evangelicals answered 17, and the average number of questions answered by all the groups was 16. The conclusion we should reach is that no one did well on the test. If this was a test on religion in a university, everyone would flunk. On questions about Christianity, evangelical Protestants showed the highest levels of knowledge. Jews, atheists, and agnostics stood out for their knowledge of other world religions, but again, making these distinctions misses the point. No group did very well in their understanding of religion. A majority of Protestants could not identify Martin Luther as the person whose writings and actions inspired the Protestant Reformation. Catholics did not understand the Roman Catholic Church's teaching on communion, and fewer than half of Americans know that the Dalai Lama is Buddhist. So what did most Americans know? Nearly 9 out of 10 knew that public school teachers cannot lead class in prayer. More than 8 in 10 knew that Mother Teresa was Catholic. More than 7 in 10 knew that Moses led the Exodus from Egypt. The Pew surveys demonstrate an appalling lack of religious knowledge. Americans are not just biblically illiterate, they are religiously illiterate. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, Weekend Edition, Penna, Dexter, Michael Berry. And you remember when we had a conversation earlier this week about all the claims that the president made, even as he came into office, about wanting to fundamentally transform America. Well, we've talked about how there has been an attempt, really all the way back to Bill Clinton, of wanting to fundamentally transform the military. And this week, the Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, ordered the military to open all combat jobs to women, even though the Marine Corps has been very concerned about that. And so once again, we have Michael Berry with us, Director of Military Affairs, an individual that has served with distinction in the military. Wanted to get some of your perspective on this decision that came down from the Defense Secretary.
Well, you know, there's been a kind of a catchphrase that's arisen in recent years to say that the military is really now the president's social experiment or a social laboratory. And, you know, I've tried to avoid jumping onto that bandwagon as much as I can, just out of respect for the office of Commander-in-Chief, and just because I still have a lot of friends that serve in the military, and both male and female. And so, you know, I just want to say that up front, that both the men and the women of our nation's armed services are really honorable people doing amazing things in our defense. With that being said, however, almost without exception, every female with whom I've ever served would be the first ones to say, there's a reason why we have standards, and there's a reason why, and by standards I simply mean, you know, you have to be able to carry X number of pounds on your back for X number of miles.
Right. For good reason.
And that's because that's the necessity of, that's reality in a combat environment. I've served in, I've deployed on combat operations. I've never deployed with women because up until now, that's never been a possibility. But I've served overseas with women in Afghanistan, and they served admirably and with distinction. I mean, they do great work, but they would be the first to say, physically, our bodies just are not designed and created to bear those kinds of loads. And so the question that immediately arises with almost every one of my friends who are still on active duty is, does this mean we're going to change the standards? And I think that's the first concern we have to have is, are we going to change standards? And if the answer to that is yes, then I am vehemently opposed to this latest move. If the answer is no, the standards remain the same, then I suppose, then that's fair. And another question that arises in terms of if this is all about fairness and equality, then does this mean that we're going to institute selective service for females? Because, as a male, when I turned 18, I had to register. Does that mean that every female in America, a U.S. citizen who's a young woman who turns 18 has to register?
There you go.
And I want to know what the mothers and fathers of America think about having their daughters register for selective service when they turn 18.
I also think about all the women who are in the military or thinking of joining the military, knowing that we had a combat exclusion for women that are not at all interested in serving in combat positions, but are interested in serving our country. What does that do? Does that actually hurt recruitment? I know that we hear that there's this clamor for career opportunities for women, and combat is a key part of that, apparently, quote unquote, a key part of that. And because they're deprived of that, they're not able to rise as high in the military. And that's been part of the rationale for doing this. But I really wonder if it doesn't go the other way, and that, you're going to see fewer women signing up to serve, joining the military, some people leaving because now they have to serve in combat. The timing of this strikes me as funny because here we are facing mass shootings. We're facing terrorist attacks, an uptick in that. And, the White House is saying we're going to strengthen our military by putting women in combat. I mean,
does not pass the straight face test.
No, it really truly doesn't. And I've actually studied this as this battle has been taking place for a decade and a half.
You've written more commentaries on this than anybody around the table, for sure.
Yeah, and there's this insistence on one hand that the standards will not be changed, but if you look at what happened, for instance, in the Army Ranger School that happened this last year,
I was going to bring it
19 women signed up, and they all washed out at first. And then they brought some back, and some of them made it. 3 made it. And these women were given, yes, you do get opportunities to take parts of the school over again. Well, these women were given the maximum opportunity. They were given looks at the training courses beforehand, special remediation. They were given all sorts of help to get through, especially the last one that got through that didn't make it with the first 2. So that's what you really have, is you have people that have been pushed through for a political reason. And it does not make me feel secure or confident at all that the standards won't change. They're also talking about the idea that we just have a different military now, and we don't need the standards to be as they have been.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of, that trust and confidence, there is a special trust and confidence that exists between the officer, the leader, and their troops. And if I'm a young, infantryman and I have a female commanding officer, am I going to show the necessary military courtesy and respect? Absolutely. But if I find out, or if I even think that there's a perception that she made it through the necessary infantry, training schools and was given, multiple chances to pass, and it was made easier for her, and the standards were lowered, what does that do to the esprit de corps, the morale, the trust that's necessary in a close, combat unit, where you place your lives in the hands of those to your right and your left, and there's just an unspoken bond of trust that's there, that you just know that you've been through the same, as the military phrase goes, you've spilled the same blood in the same mud. If it's a male, and you find out that they somehow were able to shortcut the system and got in and didn't have to do the same things that you had to do, there's already an instant level of distrust. So that's my concern, is what does this do to those, just to the unspoken trust that has to exist in a unit that has to do those types of things.
Let's come back to that Army Ranger School, because Colonel Alan West also put it this way. He said, of course, the liberal progressive detractors are going to point to the recent graduation of females, which you mentioned, again, Penna, just 3 from the Army Ranger School. But, folks, there's a difference in finishing a 60-day intensive leadership school and doing ground combat operations for an extended time and not with blanks, So even if you count that, a lot of really important questions being raised about this, and certainly want to encourage you to find some of the material that we have available on our website, and much more that I'm sure will come out in the next couple of days, because there are going to be more and more people that have talked about this. And Penna, going back to the 1990s at the very least, I remember interviews you've done with Elaine Donnelly and others. This is something we've seen coming for a long time, but it has been a social experiment. First, don't ask, don't tell, and women in more and more combat operations, and now the last 10% of military positions available to women in combat positions. And we know that in those particular units where you have a male-female combined force, it doesn't seem to do as well as an all-male force, right?
Yeah, and there's been studies done, and notably there was one in the Marine Corps that bore that out. And of course, immediately people began to criticize the study, and was it rigged? The response, I was actually amused by the response from the Marines, the female and male Marines who participated in that study, who felt that they had been thrown under the bus by their leadership, to imply that they had somehow, to use the military term, sandbagged those tests. To say, wait a minute, we're professionals. We are United States Marines. Under no circumstances would we ever, fake or sandbag a combat readiness type of exercise or test. And for you to imply that we somehow didn't give our 100% best on this to try to prove that we were capable of doing this, just so you could prove a political point, is not only ridiculous, but it's offensive. And I have to agree with him. I would feel the same way if I were, somehow told that I was being used as a guinea pig, or in some kind of laboratory experiment to make sure that, the combined female and male units were equally combat efficient and effective as the all-male units, to later be told when the all-male unit outperformed the combined one that, obviously that's because the combined unit didn't try as hard. Just again, it's more political posturing that slaps in the face those who put their lives on the line for us.
It's again, the emperor has new clothes. I mean, we can go back and talk about this study, because it didn't just prove it in one area. All across the board, males outperform females. And for them, and it's so intuitive because of females' strength and abilities. So.
Certainly is. Need to take a break. We'll come back, and we've got a full bank of phone calls, but we have a lot more to say, but I know you do as well. So if you'd like to join us as a caller drops off, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Michael Berry will be back right after these messages.
Recently, I've been struggling through a case of what I call the cruds. Pretty common thing for most of us, but if you think about it, not a good thing for those who depend on our voice as part of our work. Kind of like someone who writes for a living suffering broken fingers. But we press on. We do the best we can as God provides, right? Well, that's what I'm asking you to do today. Not to feel guilty or stressed about what you can't do, but to step up and do what you can to support the Truth Team at Point of View. We'd love it if everyone could give $100 a month. If even a small percentage did that, we could greatly expand our impact. Or $65 to underwrite a minute each month. But for many, $1 a day, $30 is a stretch. As God provides, do what you can and help us change the future through changing minds and hearts 1 month at a time. Give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View radio app, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Let's join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Michael Berry. Been talking about San Bernardino and the shooting there, but also, of course, about the issue of women in the military. So I thought we'd go to South Carolina first, talk to a former Marine. Gus, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, sir. I was listening on the way home, and, I've been out of service for 20 years, but I was infantry Marine Corps, and I didn't serve in a combat situation, which is what we train for. And I've given a lot of thought to this through the years, too, hearing about having women in a combat situation, which my concern there would be my teammates as well as those females that would be serving alongside me or a fellow Marine. What would happen psychologically to us if something were to happen to that female, to that woman? I mean, we're fathers, we're brothers, we have mothers, and in the world that we live in and what these guys are doing, they could utilize a female in a POW situation that could just deteriorate, what our thought process would be in retaining information, not giving up information where we would give our lives for our country. But, I think it's a very scary situation that you can put a platoon or a squad or a fire team in, and you've got this female that is going to be your sister throughout training and in your service. And I think that they could use, and they would use her as a tool against you.
So you kind of wonder if men in combat would make decisions that were perhaps contrary to their training to protect one of their comrades. Because there's that natural, God-given desire to protect a woman. And maybe you've been trained, listen, you have to follow this way. Don't deviate, keep going. They're just like a man, but they're not. And the reality is they're just not.
Yeah, there's no question. I thought about it many times if I were put in that situation. Yeah, I don't know what I would do. I really don't. I know I would give in. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Michael, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all kinds of practical considerations you have to make when it comes to thinking about integrating a combat unit. And we were talking, during the break, just about in terms of field medical care. The basic things that they teach you to do if one of your buddies gets injured in combat. I mean, I was just talking about an example right off the top of my head would be if somebody takes a severe injury to one of their legs and they're bleeding from the femoral artery. One of the things they teach you to do is how to stop that bleeding by going in there and pinching, close that artery. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to cut their pants off. And I just think that and it sounds silly and it sounds trivial, but there are some practical concerns that many people can and should have when it comes to things like that. One of the things I think about too is if the rationale behind this move is number one, equality, and number two, that females are every bit as physically capable as males when it comes to combat arms, then why not? If you're going to experiment, let's go all the way. And why not experiment with an all-female infantry unit? That way you eliminate at least some of the concerns when it comes to fraternization, when it comes to the things that Gus just identified, and some of the things that I just identified. Why not have an all-female combat arms unit and see how well they do? And if they perform every bit as well as the male units, then, okay, maybe we could admit that we were wrong and we can go from there.
I agree.
Chris, I appreciate your service, and thank you for calling in today. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. The fraternization, we just mentioned the word in passing, but that's an issue, and it's been an issue ever since men and women have actually worked together in the military. Again, the argument is, well, we allow men and women in the workplace, but the military is different, isn't it, Michael?
There's really no other entity or organization in American society that parallels the military when it comes to how closely together you have to work and the amount of trust that you have to have. I mean, I just, from my own personal experience, and I'm thinking back to just an experience, and this was just a training environment. This was not, in Afghanistan or in combat or anything like that, but this was in a training environment. I remember going off on a patrol, and there were originally 4 of us, and then they decided to do kind of the, hey, let's split up thing. Well, for somehow or another, I ended up, and I wasn't the one in charge, so I didn't make the rules, but it ended up being me and a female Marine off during this patrol in the woods, and it was just the two of us, out there for literally hours on end, out in the middle of what felt like nowhere. And I just, looking back now, I shake my head and I chuckle almost, thinking, I can't believe I ended up in that predicament. And I should have said something like, hey, shouldn't we do but I think it was that notion of paternalism, that paternal instinct of, well, we can't split up and have the two guys together and the two girls together, because if the two girls get in trouble, then what do we do? So we should split up and have at least a guy and a girl paired up. It was almost, we didn't have that discussion, but it was instinctual to do that. But then you end up, like you were saying, Kerby, in that situation where, what would happen if, there was some awkwardness between me and this young female Marine? So there's so many variables that now we're going to have to watch, try to be, fixed or played out through this social experiment.
Let's take some more phone calls. Marshall, I think you are a Marine, so I'd love to get your comments. First of all, thank you for your service, and what would you like to add to the conversation?
Certainly, sir. Thank you. I just wanted to chime in on this a little bit. I'm a current Marine stationed in Beaufort, South Carolina. I got back from combat deployment recently, but regarding women in combat roles, I think we've missed the issue altogether when you make this a civil rights issue. All of the practical concerns that come out of this are, for the most part, obvious. But I think the real issue of an issue like this is moral, in the sense that the God-given roles that men and women have, a man's role to protect and defend, and a woman's role to be a supporter and encourager and a nurturer, and how we're hardwired for those things emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that is really an issue of gender roles, which is even further confused in our culture and our society, that no one is less noble than the other necessarily, which is the way we try to think about it, but it's just different. The way we were designed originally from the very beginning in the garden, when the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. The man's role is to rule, and the man's role is to protect and defend. And I see a much deeper issue in this with gender roles and how we play out into that. And the practical issues, I think, are surface issues, but that's become the main source of debate, unfortunately.
Appreciate your service, and thank you for your comments. Let me take another one real quickly, because this is a question that we surfaced a minute ago. Karen in Missouri, KCMH. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you very much. I love the show, and the caller that just spoke was awesome. I was in the Utah National Guard. As a female, I had to do less push-ups than the man, and I still had problems with my shoulder and had medical problems with it. And I was wondering if there are studies shown the injury rates per female, versus the male, and if that was taken into account with them doing this.
Well, this Marine study did show that, didn't it, Michael?
Yeah, there are, I'm sure, countless studies. Unfortunately, I can't, name any off the top of my head, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert on those medical studies. But what I do know, Karen, you experienced it yourself, and I experienced it anecdotally just through my own observations. Was that yes, if the circumstances were made even, in other words, if it was literally just a straight line, 1.5 mile or 3 mile run or whatever, then I never noticed any acute problems or anything like that. But once you start introducing large amounts of weight, and look, I know that our callers can't see me, but physically I'm not a huge guy. I don't have a large frame. But I knew that I had to compensate for that by being very rigorous in my physical training and preparing for that, and I was able to do so. But I know that anecdotally, when you start dealing with carrying 50% or more of your body weight on your frame, the incidence of injury is going to increase. And I observed that happening with the female Marines with whom I served to a greater degree than the males. And that's not to detract or denigrate their service or their desire or their courage or any of that. It's just a fact of nature. It's just a fact of physical nature, of biology.
Here's a result from the Marine Corps study that we were discussing earlier. It was a year-long study, and found all kinds of findings, but this one, musculoskeletal injury rates were 45% for females, 18.8% for males.
There you go.
So women are more likely. And I know one of the things Elaine Donnelly always says, who has sort of tried to weigh into this issue for many years, that women in combat are more likely not to survive. I mean, that is the basic bottom line than men.
So again, we'll take a break, and then I see some others want to weigh in on that. Some want to talk about the issue of prayer. Some want to talk about the women in the military. And of course, we've talked about the shooting this week in San Bernardino. Lots to cover. We'll do our best in this last segment here to give as many of you a chance to join the conversation, make your comments. But if you don't have enough opportunity, please take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. You'll see that we've focused and actually posted quite a number of articles today that I think you'll find helpful. So go there. And of course, we've also encouraged you to go to libertyinstitute.org. We'll be right back.
This is the tale of two university presidents. First, at Yale, Peter Salovey responded to student mob demonstrations with efforts to make students feel more valued rather than disrespected and in pain. These students either have parents rich enough to pay the school's $65,000 per year tuition or are bright enough to benefit from the university's massive endowment. But they're offended, stating Yale is not an inclusive space for people of color and other minorities. This fall, a committee of students raised the possibility that someone might wear an insensitive Halloween costume, like a feathered headdress or a turban, anything that might negatively impact someone's sense of being in a safe space at the university. One professor, Erica Christakis, thinking this a bit too PC, wrote a letter to students in which she wondered, have we lost faith in young people's capacity, in your capacity to exercise self-censure through social norming, and also in your capacity to ignore or reject things that trouble you? 700 came out to protest. President Salovey says he hears students' cries for help, saying some students find life on our campus profoundly difficult. He promised relief for their great distress. A generation of coddling by university officials has helped create these perishable snowflakes, which exist in great numbers at the nation's progressive universities. There are a few floating around even at Christian colleges. Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, reports a student coming forward after a university chapel service, complaining he felt victimized by the sermon because it was on 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. This student said the sermon made him feel bad for not showing love, and therefore the speaker was wrong for causing him and his peers such discomfort. Dr. Piper, unlike the presidents at Yale, Mizzou, and elsewhere, is definitely not apologizing. In an open message to the offended student on the university's blog, he wrote, "That feeling of discomfort you have after listening to a sermon is called a conscience." Dr. Piper explained that the goal in many sermons is to elicit confession of sin, not to coddle students in their selfishness. He stated that for students who want to be enabled rather than confronted, there are many universities across the land where that can happen, but Oklahoma Wesleyan isn't one of them. He offered some strong advice, including these words: "We don't believe that you have been victimized every time you feel guilty, and we don't issue trigger warnings before altar calls." He ended the post with a statement to students of Oklahoma Wesleyan that's obvious, but too often downplayed in the oversensitive environment at universities everywhere. He wrote, "This is a place where you will quickly learn that you need to grow up. This is not daycare. This is a university." It would be nice if more university presidents would treat students with such love. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Michael Berry, and we'll head out to California. Thomas, thank you for serving. I believe you're active military.
Yes, sir. I'm an active duty military officer. I'm infantry, and I was here when they did their testing. It was a joke. They tested on the easiest ranges possible, and they came out in April, which is the easiest months to train at the facility that I'm currently stationed at. This facility, no one wants to come out here in December because it's too cold, and no one wants to come out here in July because it will literally fry your brain. So when they came out here at the easiest time, and they did the easiest ranges possible. In doing so, they still broke every female. All the females that were in the infantry side were either on light duty or broken by the time that the exercise was over with. When they moved up to the mountain warfare package, they just couldn't keep up. The weight of the gear and the physical fitness, they just couldn't do it. The Marines that were with him that were males weren't all infantry males. They had to go find males from all over the Marine Corps because nobody wanted to volunteer for this because no one wanted their name tagged to it. So when they found people from all over, the males that were in the groups with them weren't all infantry males. They were fire support and firefighters and mail clerks and all sorts of other things, and a lot of them are reservists. So you had people that were taken from their hometown, given very little training beforehand, and thrown into this mix. If they had went up against a frontline battalion that's here on the facility that I'm at, they would have been crushed. And that's just life. That's how it is. There's no same standard. Physical fitness is not the same. If you look at the PFT and the CFT, they have to do 3 pull-ups. We have to do 20. This is for political purposes. This will come to fruition because there's nothing that we can do to stop it. And that's the way life is. So now we must look at how do we mitigate this situation so there is not excessive loss of life. None of us know how to do that yet, but we'll come up with a plan. We're smart people, and we love our country, and we love our Corps, and we're going to find a way out of this.
Thank you for your service. I want to get Michael's comments. Any comments?
Well, yeah, I appreciate Thomas weighing in because he's confirmed, suspicions or accounts that I had heard secondhand. So he can provide firsthand, testimony to that effect. So I appreciate that, and I think he has hit the nail on the head in terms of everything that I, as a former active duty officer, and I'll be the first to throw out the disclaimer: I'm not an 0302. I'm not an infantry officer. But I certainly served with many infantry officers. I was with an infantry battalion in Afghanistan, and so and every Marine is a rifleman first. So every officer goes through rudimentary or basic infantry type skills. So everything that I saw through my training pipeline and in Afghanistan has all been confirmed by what Thomas is saying is happening on the ground now. And I guess I'm thankful that when I was on active duty, I didn't have to, deal with any of that. But certainly stuff that you might talk about, when you're hanging around the water cooler, so to speak, and just kind of theorizing about what would happen if we, in the Marines, we used to refer to it as if we went Starship Troopers, in reference to the book and in the film in which they had these integrated units. Yeah. And so, I think at the end of the day, the hard question that needs to be asked is this going to make the Marine Corps or the United States military on a larger scale, is it going to make us a better fighting force? Is it going to enable us to accomplish our mission better? And the proverbial boots on the ground, those who are not in the Pentagon are all saying no, but for some reason our voices are not being heard.
It's very interesting because the Marines, this test that we talked about, the comprehensive test, was conducted by the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps have held strong. They have a 93% male force dominated by infantry. The commandant, the former commandant of the Marine Corps, Joseph E. Dunford Jr., he's now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he has been notably absent from this announcement. He actually tried to weigh in for the Marine Corps' policies over and above the other services, but he obviously was overruled. So now I wonder, will the Marine Corps work hard to get exceptions for women from combat for various reasons, because of their they've had it proven, and also because who the Marine Corps is and that they are infantry-based? Will some of these things happen in order to maintain the aura of equality, but perhaps the reality might be something different? What do you think?
Well, I think that ship has sailed in terms of seeking the exemption. I know that the Marine Corps already sought those exemptions and really fought much harder than the other branches did for those exemptions, and to try to at least, as hard as they could, to maintain the current, or the previous status quo. And the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of Defense said there will be no exceptions. There will be no exemptions. And so, if I recall, I think General Dunford or the current Commandant General Amos said, "Okay, well, as good Marines, we understand, and we will carry out and execute the mission." I think implying that we don't have to like it, but we'll do it, and that's kind of been. Ever since there's been, 2 Marines, there's always been one telling the other what to do and the other one saying, well, I don't have to like it, but I'll do it, kind of thing. So I think that's where we are. And unfortunately, I really think the only way that this is going to be reversed is if America finds itself dealing with the blood of her daughters on its hands. And that, that's a really tragic and scary idea, but that might be the only way that people wake up and see what's happening and say, the military is not a laboratory where we can go around tinkering to make social experiments. It has a mission. It has a very defined mission, and there's only one thing you should ever do to tinker with that, and that's to make it better able to accomplish that mission.
Seems to me we might want to ask a presidential candidate, if you're going to be actually a commander-in-chief, what do you think about women in combat roles? That's one more question here. And as we're winding down, I apologize for all the people that didn't have a chance to get in today, but thank you, Thomas, and some of you that served in the military, and thank you for your perspective, especially that firsthand experience was certainly helpful. But I'm just thinking, Michael, 39 million born-again Christians did not vote in the last election. 13 million were not registered to vote. 26 million were registered to vote, did not vote. If they turned out and began to speak out about some of the issues we've addressed today, ranging from religious liberty, the war on terrorism, women in combat roles, I think it might change the nature of this country, and certainly could affect not only the presidential election, but all sorts of congressional elections as well.
There is no way that it can't change what's happening, because that's the primary problem and the frustration that I have with evangelicals, of whom I count myself one of them, is that they don't vote. And, if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain, I guess. I know it's trust me, as a constitutional lawyer, yes, I understand the First Amendment. You do have a right to complain. But, tongue in cheek, you don't have a right to complain, because that's really the only way we're going to effect change in this country is through ensuring that our leaders are held accountable.
Yes. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, Michael. It's always been great to have you, but especially today, your expertise in the military. Very, very good. And Penna, thank you for joining us as well. And I would encourage people to get your commentary to university presidents. We've had it posted, and we send it out on Saturday for people that are on our email list. And so thank you for joining me as well.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Next week, we'll be looking at a number of issues, one of which is how to encourage and motivate pastors on some of these social issues. Alex McFarland will be with us, and of course, we'll have an open line because there'll be a lot more to learn about what happened in San Bernardino this week. Be safe, and certainly join our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris. We'll see you back here on Monday.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.